The Life and Works of Karl Spitteler by Albert Wilhelm Boesche, Ph.D., Assistant Professor of German, Cornell University. It is a curious coincidence that of the four greatest modern representatives of German literature in Switzerland, not one knew the inspiration of fame and acclaim until his life was past its zenith. Gottfried Keller's 50th birthday found him admired by the discerning few, but as yet quite unknown to the many. Not much younger was Conrad Ferdinand Meyer when, in the full maturity of his genius, he at last no longer restrained the creative impulse. Joseph Victor Widmann, to be sure, attained a fair measure of success before his day was far advanced. But even he was past 50 when, in the May Beatles comedy and in Saint and Beast, he revealed that fullness of poetic power which entitles him to a place among the best. But the most remarkable case of delayed fame is that of Karl Spitteler, who, the youngest of this group of four, is still with us today. On the threshold of the psalmist's 80 years and 10, but still vigorous in body and mind, he is now gathering the rich reward of lifelong loyalty to a high ideal. It was at the age of 22 that Spitteler jubilantly recognized his mission as an epic poet. He was 55 when the first part of his Olympian Spring appeared, and he had reached 60 before its last volume was published. That by this work he has fulfilled that mission, that in the Olympian Spring he has given the German literature an epic poem of the highest rank, is gradually coming to be recognized. But the remarkable fact remains that a poet of undoubted genius has been so long in realizing his own ambition. All the retarding factors will probably not be known until an extensive biography of this author appears. But as he reveals himself to us in his works, we recognize in him a man whose exalted devotion to an ideal was, in his younger years at least, a source of such torment to him that the very storm and stress of his feelings interfered with their crystallization into works of art. And when, with heroic resolve, he at last did succeed in overcoming this obstacle, his first work, Prometheus and Epimetheus, a profound allegory of the suffering of exalted idealism, met with absolutely no response. The condition of mind in which this bitter disappointment left the poet has been compared by himself to that of a wounded bird which, with desperate flapping of wings, tries to maintain itself in the air, but at last falls crippled to the ground to fight with dogs, cats, and crows. Then bitterness of heart gives way to resignation, and this in turn to new attempts at flight. It is a period which is marked by what we may call his minor works, when at last the old strength and courage have come back, the soaring flight of Olympus is resumed. The story of Karl Spitteler's life and works up to his Olympian Spring can be briefly told. He was born on the 24th of April, 1845, in Liestal, near Basel. His father was a high functionary in the cantonal service, as well as in that of the federal government, and it was due to his holding the portfolio of federal security of the Treasury from 1849 to 1856 that the poet's earlier childhood memories are associated with Bernay, the Swiss capital, rather than with his native town. To the latter, however, the family returned when the boy was 11. The proximity of the city of Basel provided excellent schooling. Indeed, in the higher classes of the gymnasium, he was fortunate enough to draw inspiration from such men as Wilhelm Wackernagel, the eminent Germanic philologist, and Jacob Burckhardt, who just about that time published the first of his two famous works on the Italian Renaissance. From 1863 to 1868, he studied at the universities of Basel, Zurich, and Heidelberg, changing after the first 2 years from jurisprudence to theology, for reasons which seem to have been philosophic rather than religious in the stricter sense. For when, after passing all the required examinations, he received his first call as pastor, he did not feel justified in accepting it. This decision was serious enough in that it shut him out from the one career for which he had regularly prepared himself. But we can fully understand his step if we know that the poet, who as such had been revealed to himself at 17, and who 5 years later had come to realize his special mission as an epic poet, was now living in those visions and ecstasies, those doubts and torments, of which the first great work of his pen is the Reflection. But it was not until he had returned from an 8-year sojourn in Russia, where he filled the position of tutor in the family of a general, that he gave his Prometheus and Epimetheus its final form. Its first part appeared in 1880, the combined first and second parts a year later. Prometheus and Epimetheus is a profound allegory. It symbolizes the untold misery and sublime ecstasy of an exalted soul, unswervingly loyal to its ideal, even though the distant hope for one supreme hour of joy in the attainment of this ideal must be purchased at the price of a life full of anguish. The disdain for the ordinary standards of human ethics, which finds expression in this remarkable work, as well as its style of prose whose solemn diction and rhythm have been very aptly characterized as hieratic, remind one vividly of Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. And curiously enough, when Spitteler's work at last found readers, the common impression was that he had been influenced by Nietzsche's famous work. This is chronologically impossible, and indeed, it is now known that the reverse is true. Nietzsche was influenced by Spitteler's work, although as far as known, he never acknowledged his indebtedness. There is this difference, however, between Spitteler's long-neglected Prometheus and Nietzsche's Zarathustra. Poetically, the earlier work is undoubtedly the better of the two, but it is far more difficult to unravel the mysteries of its symbolism than it is to comprehend Zarathustra's powerfully direct preaching. And indeed, it may be said that if today's Spitteler's allegory is less of an enigma to us than it was to a great contemporary poet, this is in large part due to our having, in the meantime, passed through the Zarathustra phase. The contemporary poet just referred to was none other than Godfrey Keller, who was one of the first to read Prometheus and Epimetheus, and who recognized in it the product of a creative imagination of the highest order, without, however, being able to solve its strangely fascinating Pythic mystery. This we know today from a letter of his to Joseph Victor Widman, who had brought his friend's production to Keller's notice. In the light of Spitteler's subsequent development, the following lines are particularly interesting. But is this still an age for sibylline books? Must we not regret to see a creative mind of this order turning to allegorified rather than to real life? Or is the peculiar character of this talent such as not to be capable of expressing itself except in these hallowed, mystic, consecrated strains? Even though today Spitteler's Sibylline book is better understood and must be rated as one of his two greatest works, it is nevertheless fortunate that Keller's question has since been answered by the Olympian Spring. The bitter experience of the world's almost absolute unresponsiveness to his first appeal for a hearing might in itself have been enough to retard further poetic effort, but it appears that the wounded bird would soon have taken flight again, had it not been privileged of its liberty. For with his first work a seemingly complete failure, Spitteler could not hope to support himself by a literary career. He had, upon his return from Russia in 1879, accepted a position in a girls' high school in Bern, whose principal was Joseph Victor Widman. From 1881 to 1885, he filled a similar position in the little town of Neuville, Neunstadt, not far from Bern, and situated in the same canton. Here the author of Prometheus and Epimetheus bravely endured the slavery of 30 teaching hours a week. In 1883 he married. In the same year he published his Extramundana, a collection of cosmic myths. It was, if we may accept the poet's own judgment, a premature attempt at flight which Spitteler later regretted as an inadequate expression of his genius. Not until the end of the 80s did new works from his pen begin to appear in rapid succession. In 1889, 4 years after he had given up teaching for a journalistic career in Basel, he published Butterflies, his first collection of poems. In 1891, Fredeli de Colodori, his first collection of short stories. In 1892, his prose, Idle Gustave, and another collection of poems under the title Literary Parables, which in 1896 was followed by his ballads. Another prose epic, Conrad the Lieutenant, appeared in 1898, and in the same year a collection of essays under the title of Laughing Truths. It is difficult to date his charming tale, The Girl Haters, for though it was first serially published in the early 90s, it did not meet with success until 1907. It was republished in a condensed form. And thus it might be regarded as a product of the decade of the Olympian Spring. And to this period of highest attainment belong also the short novel Imago and the collection of lyrics under the title of Bell Songs, both of which appeared in 1906. It would lead us too far afield to characterize each of these productions with any degree of fullness. Coming from the author of the Olympian Spring, all of them may be regarded as minor works, and indeed it appears that the poet himself looked upon them as preparatory tasks. Needless to say, they are of high literary merit. They reveal gifts of which the Prometheus and Epimetheus had given no indication. Thus the music of Spitteler's Butterflies, varying from capriccios to pensive adagio, and the melodious ringing and singing of his bell song show him a master of lyric poetry. In his short stories, the former symbolist astonishes us by a sharp and varied character delineation, by a truth to real life which would have delighted Keller, and by a wide scope of scene and subject. If in Fredeli de Colodori we get a taste of what Spitteler himself calls Russian realism, if in Conrad the Lieutenant a tragic story of village life is told with an intense rapidity of action and an almost cruel naturalism, We, on the other hand, meet with a genial humor in The Girl Haters, a sunny little story of two real boys and an almost bewitching little tease of a girl, while in Gustav, amid idyllic scenes of rustic simplicity, we behold the first flights of a young genius, inspired by a deep and pure love. Quite different from all these is Imago, an almost harrowing tale of the dreadful conflicts in a man's soul between what he believes to be his sacred mission and the reawakening of a passionate love which he once sacrificed to his higher calling, to which now is without hope. That in this novel, which appeared only a few years ago, the poet has given us a key to his Prometheus and Epimetheus. He has told himself Imago is the explanation of Prometheus and Epimetheus. Imago relates to what really happened. Prometheus shows what a poet made of it. Prometheus shows what a poet made of it. That the poet at the age of 60 once more reverted to his earlier theme can now be understood. The ideal for which he had once suffered was at last attained. He was nearly 50 when a fortunate change in his affairs permitted him to give up the grinding duties which so far had absorbed the greater portion of his time and strength. Since that time, his home has been in Lucerne, and here on the shore of the lake of the four forest cantons in the famous Tell country, he can now concentrate his still marvelously useful poetic power upon the accomplishment of the one greatest task of his life, and bestow upon it the full richness of matured genius. To the masterpiece on which Spitteler's enduring fame will rest, we will now turn our attention. The Olympian Spring is most decidedly not what from its name, or even from a partial acquaintance with its contents, one might take it to be. Unlike Shelley's Prometheus Unbound, or Keats' Endymion or Hyperion, or Swinburne's Atalanta in Calydon, unlike these and other poems inspired by a profound poetic and philosophic sympathy with the spirit of ancient Greece, Spitteler's epic does not represent a poetical revival of classical legends. It cannot even be said to avail itself of classical mythology for a setting. It rather uses it as an appeal to the imagination. The mythic, long ago relieving the poet and ourselves of the fetters of everyday reality, sets his creative and our receptive imagination free to fathom eternal reality. Even this, to be sure, presupposes on our part some acquaintance with classical mythology, as does the Divine Comedy or the second part of Faust. We're supposed to be susceptible to the appeal of such names as Zeus, Apollo, Aphrodite, and to know, or rather to feel, what Anunnaki, necessity, and Moria, fate, mean what it meant to the ancient Greeks. It is well that we should come thus prepared, but it is far more important that we should not be so hampered by traditional associations as not to recognize the newer, deeper signification which in the Olympian Spring ancient gods and ancient conceptions have acquired. Spitteler's Olympian Spring is not a philosophic poem in the didactic sense. It is, first of all, an epic and must be judged as such. But it goes without saying that no epic of the heroic type, and such as Spitteler's, would fail to reveal the poet's attitude towards what Tennyson, in his line of the great epic poet of ancient Rome, so beautifully calls the doubtful doom of humankind. And indeed, Spitteler does not leave us in uncertainty about his answer to the old question of the way, of the why and wherefore. His interpretation of life is as grandiose as is the heroic tale he tells of the doings of gods and men. It is hoped that the following outline will give some idea both of the tale and of its meaning. Anunnaki, necessity, the dread cruel ruler of the universe, from whose decrees even divinity cannot appeal, has ordained the fall of the old gods. Kronos and his adherents, their place is to be taken by the gods of the future, who as yet are held imprisoned in gloomy Erebus. They are loath to leave the nether darkness and would fain continue in the hopeless stupor of forgetfulness in which they have slept through eons. But Anunnaki's decree is unalterable, and so they depart accompanied by Hades, the ruler of Erebus, who guides them safely past the dangers which threaten them on their journey to the world above. When from the Mount of Morning they first behold the sunlit beauty of the earth over which they are to rule, deepest emotion finds expression in sobs of joy. If thus far they have been dumb-driven by fate, now the love of life and the sense of its beauty fill their hearts to overflowing, and songs well up from their lips glorifying the radiant orb of day. The world seems new and young to them, but alas, it is not long before a shrill discord mars the sweet harmony of this youthful, trustful faith. As they travel onward, they find the rocks beneath their feet worn by footsteps. For here, in an eternal cycle, the new gods and the old have passed on their journey of hope or of despair. Then cried a voice, a sigh, alas, this world is old. How much of sorrow may its history unfold? And from the yawning cleft the echo's thunder rolled. For ain't no spot on earth but witnessed grief untold. They are soon to have a taste of this grief untold, for it is not long before they meet the old dethroned gods on their way to that gloom of oblivion from which they themselves, the gods to be, rejoice to have escaped. They, the young arrivals and hearers, are greeted by angry glances and cries, but gentle words melted this wrath into a pathetic plaint. The fallen sadly revel in the memories of the golden days, cut short by Anunnaki's cruel decree. It is an inexpressibly beautiful passage. Memory, bitter in its sweetness, is symbolized by a blue flower, which the fallen gods, in reverent silence, passed from hand to hand. And each who took the flower, adorning bent his knees, breathed in the balmy fragrance, kissed it fervently. But as he passed the flower on, he hid his head upon his neighbor's breast, and bitter tears he shed. From this the old gods are aroused by the arrival of mighty Kronos, who is unable to find solace in memories alone. His anger at his dethronement is lashed into fury by the sight of those who are to take his place. Defying Anunnaki, he calls upon his former fellow gods to retake by force the throne and power which are theirs by right. Onward they rush, up the steep mountainside only to be dashed into the abyss by an avalanche of rocks. The last to meet this fate is majestic Kronos himself. His bitter words of farewell are a curse for his successor. Too exalted to be happy, he shall taste the emptiness of all that is. Profoundly moved by this appalling spectacle, the gods sadly proceed on their journey, which wearies them more and more. But Hebe, sent by Uranus, ruler of the starry heavens, brings them cheer and leads them to her master's palace, where they are hospitably received. A peculiar charm pervades the story of this visit. The serenity of the astral palace, the kind-heartedness of the host, the loveliness of his daughters. All of this is told with Homeric naivety, and indeed not without touches of genial humor. This idyll, however, is not without an episode which, in grandeur of conception, could not easily be surpassed. Urged by their kindly host to relate the experiences of their journey, the gods tell him of the fate of Kronos and of other dismal sights they have beheld. Wild anger seizes the king. His generous heart rebels against the pitilessness of Anunnaki's rule. Tell me, he cries, would you, Anunnaki's final doom and downfall, know? Of the mountain land, behold the far-off glow. Behold Nirvana and the rocks of Eschaton, the angel sleeping neath the tree of Thaterone. See in the fury forge, her engines grind and groan, creation stamp its writ of plainting on granite stone. Then Uranus takes his eager guest on a strange journey, which brings them first to the roaring fury forge, where, driven by mighty engines, 100 hammers are striking runes into the endless strip of rocks. Iron giants, with trumpets to their lips, proclaim and blast above the deafening roar. The meaning of all this? On this book of stones, creation's curse is recorded. On this book of stone, creation's curse is recorded. Every wail, every tear, every cry of anguish, though it be gasped out into lonely night and darkness, is here hewn into rock. That on the day of doom, when justice shall be done, this book of stone accused the nameless guilty one. The journey is now resumed and takes the gods to the very bounds of time and space, where Anunnaki's rule ends. From a dun, dreary coast whose desolate stillness is broken only by the dismal, monotonous splash of wave after wave, they behold the Sea of Nirvana. Endless in its expanse, no shore beyond is to be seen, but a tinge of light on far-off clouds seem to come off from an otherworld's land. It is another fairy world which knows not the ruthless rule of fate. Even Uranus does not hold out more than a hope. A land of neon lies, they say, beyond the sea. Devoutly praise the hoping heart that is so it to be. That so it be. This undying hope for a better world, is symbolized by a beautiful angel sleeping in a little church at the foot of the rock of Eschaton, who, like one in a trance, chants this message. I hear a world beneath its weight of evil groan. I feel its sorrow, hear its every sob and moan. Be comforted, I tell you, of a coming morn, when reparation from the womb of time is born. Then shall redemption's flower heal the sick and sore. Then sobs shall turn to sighs of joy forevermore. When will this day come? To this eager question the anger replies. When you shall hear the cocks from far off Meon crow, when through Nirvana's field the mower's synth shall mow. The gods are loath to leave, for the sight of that little church of hope seems more beautiful to them than aught else in this world. Might they not wait for the great promise to be fulfilled? Who knows, perchance the cocks will crow this very day. The world is old, its saviors should no more delay. But Uranus urges them to depart. Since the beginning of time, he himself had been vainly waiting for redemption's day to dawn. He will continue to hope for the land of Meon. But in the meantime, let us set about the tasks that are ours in this world to do. Reluctantly, the gods return with him. There is something grandiose about this vision of the land of Meon. It loses nothing of its poetic beauty and fascination if we know that the word Meon itself is strangely and sadly symbolic. Its underlying Greek significance may either be better or that which is not. There can be little doubt that this ambiguity of the word is intentional. If it were not for fate's inviolable decree, the gods would remain forever with Uranus and his lovely daughters. But vexed at the delay, Anunnaki, by a subtle poison, changes love and friendship into aversion and discord. It is a poison known in ordinary life by the saying of satiety. Indeed, nothing could be psychologically truer than this passage. As soon as the parting has become a certainty, the poison ceases to work, and now, when it is too late, the gods deploy their own fickleness. Even when they have arrived at the foot of Olympus, their thoughts longingly wander back to the astral court of Uranus, and not until the great struggle of supremacy sets in do they become reconciled to the loss of a happy dream. It is the old tragic story of life. Ambition, lust for power, win out against the gentler longings of the heart. Some say someday utter disillusionment will prove the futility of the sacrifice, but not until the doors of the astral palace of youth have closed forever.